Hi all you true believers in the democratic process, my name's Joe Glass and welcome to my channel. Well, it's been a week, huh? To try and lighten the mood, I'm going to do what I normally do and read some comics and give you a bit of an idea of what comics may be to check out this week for comics released on the 6th of January 2021. First up, I'd like to address the many issues we have. Obviously, we're getting comics, so as such, comic reviews are going to be a little bit irregular on my channel. They'll happen as and when I'm able to get things. Unfortunately, obviously being based not just in the UK but also within Wales, we are having a number of issues with getting comics. I'm very lucky that I have a local comic book shop which does a click and collect procedure, so it makes it incredibly safe and easy to get comics from the store. But obviously they're not open all the time, they're open certain hours, and obviously I've are restricted as well in my own movements, and so as such I don't always get to pick them up. I do a lot of reading digitally these days as well, so there is an option there. Moreover, we've had problems in the UK with actually receiving a lot of our comics for the last couple of weeks now as a result of Brexit. So thanks Boris and thanks Jeppy. First up for review, we've got Death Metal issue 7, the final issue of the major event that's been running through most of 2020, written by Scott Snyder with art by Greg Capullo, with of course the colours by Placencia. This issue actually has several other artists and things involved as well, majorly Yannick Piquet and other colorists such as Fairbairn and Sinclair, all of whom do stellar work. It's really hard to review this book based on the quality of the content of the art and everything, because it is perfect. Greg Capullo is one of the best artists in the industry, but the industry's seen in decades. The colour team all do exceptional work. It's really fantastic. Obviously Capullo's long-term inker, Glapion, always makes all of his pencils completely crisp and clear, so the art just really sells a lot of the story there. But of course there's also the main story as it is written by Scott Snyder, possibly one of his last major DC books in a while. It's a really strong story. I will admit, for me personally, I kind of preferred Metal as an event. It was just a little bit more focused, and it kind of had a bit more of a through line, whereas Death Metal has kind of been a little bit more expansive and had a bigger role in sort of tie off a lot of discordant plot threads from across the DC universe and sort of leave them in a position that they are now. The great thing is the position that it does lead them to is fantastic. I'm very excited for the future of DC Comics and where things are going down the line. One thing I will say about getting to the end of Death Metal issue 7, I found myself really wishing that there was a event book by Yannick Piquet coming out, because his art at that end scene, which is very different from Capullo and the rest's usual style. It's a little bit more cleaner and smoother in the line work, and it kind of just has that sort of celebratory element, which, given the story element and what happens in the story without spoilers, kind of works very well for that moment. It was just really nice to see, so I kind of really want them to have a big event sometimes with his whole art through the whole thing. But you know, that's down the line. This is apparently one of Yannick's last major stories at DC as well for a little while. He'll be popping back, however, so hopefully maybe one day down the line. Next up, we're getting into the Future State books, which is the exciting new thing which DC are doing for 2 months before the real moving forward with their line. So first up, I want to check out The Next Batman. Next Batman is written by John Ridley, Oscar-winning writer, with art by Nick Derrington. The colours are by Tamara Bonvillain, whose colour work actually works really well with Nick's artwork, I find. It just kind of has that right level of moody for the sort of darker sections, but then has a nice stark element when we're in sort of the areas and locations where that's really required. So Tamara really shows a diversity in what she's capable of doing with the colour work, when really sells the story. There's something really interesting going on with the lettering actually in this story. Clayton Coles, who's the letterer, has actually used like lined off tails on the word balloons, which I don't quite get what the decision was for that, but it actually looks really great. So it was, I don't know, it's a really weird thing, like a little nitpicky thing to point out, but like not in a bad way. Like I really loved it, but don't know why that decision was made, but it's there and I like it. And it just sort of makes the whole sort of story feel a little bit more, I don't know how, possibly with the sort of general air of the story as well, just kind of makes it feel a little bit more down to earth, or as down to earth as you can get in a now fascist, despotic Gotham, which is with a guy in a batsuit running around, you know? It's a fun story. It's a really interesting take on the Batman story, and I'm really interested to see where it goes. Now, another thing with the Future State, the next Batman issue, which I loved, and again, it's kind of a little bit of an out there sort of thing to notice, is it's a bit chunkier. And I love it a bit chunkier and thick. And it's kind of got several short stories in it. And this is something I kind of love. Granted, the issue price is thus higher as a result, but I'm kind of for it. Like, if this is the future of the way DC Comics are looking to go, I'm really behind it, and I quite like the idea, and I hope it sticks around for a while. Because as well as having your main story, you have several other short stories which sort of give you a bit more of a feel of the area or the world being broader than the singular character, which is really kind of interesting for me. Also, you get to see work by other people. So obviously the next story in there is an Outsiders story written by Brandon Thomas and features artwork by Sumit Kumar with some inking help from Raul Fernandez. And I'll be honest, Sumit's art in this is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, if you saw his work in the absolutely stellar V Savage Shores, it's really, really stepped up another level, which I find astonishing to think, because V Savage Shores was gorgeous. Like, it was top of its game then. So to see artwork here which is a bit smoother and a bit more kinetic and flowing was just really interesting to see. This one is coloured by Jordi Belair, and I think the colours really work in this because they're slightly more sort of muted and moody, like not in a sort of dull way. Like, it's still a very vivid comic, like where the colors are vividly bright, they are vividly bright, and there's a certain moment which really requires things to be much more energetic in its view, and that looks really great when Belair does it. The weird thing I find with it is just that it's kind of, it sounds again a bit odd to say, it works with the paper stock choice really well, which I think is like a sign of someone who really knows what they're doing. You know, they are working with the materials that they are given, and they've created something which overall looks fantastic. The final short in the next Batman issue for Future State is called Arkham Knights. It's by Paul Jenkins with Jack Herbert on art, Gabe L-Tape on the colours, and Rob Lee doing the letters. And it's not my favourite. It's not bad. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. It doesn't help for it involves characters who aren't necessarily my favourites as well, so maybe that's just my big element, which I'm not really into it. But it's perhaps the weaker of the three stories. Now, the fact is, it's still not a bad story. It's very well told. It's very well written. There's plenty of action in that story. And it kind of gives you a full, complete idea of other things which are going on in Gotham at this presumably same time. I think it's just a case that this particular story feels a little bit not seen before, but like not new. It kind of feels like we've kind of seen similar stories in DC Comics in particular, and also comics generally, in a while. So it's feeling a little samey, but not a bad thing. Like I said, that can be perfectly great, and it still makes the overall book worth checking out. Because like I say, even when you've got a great book where you have one weaker story, doesn't necessarily mean it's not a bad thing. It just means that, you know, you've got probably 3 stories and maybe one's not your favorite compared to the others. Like I say, Future State Batman, the next Batman even, is absolutely worth checking out. So highly recommend it. In fact, this being the first one of the Future State books I read, really had me excited, because like as a whole, this whole Future State experiment just feels like it's really sort of bringing up some interesting new ideas for the characters, and hopefully something which will stick around going on forward. Next up was another Future State book. It was Wonder Woman, which for people who aren't regular comic book readers, I'm sure you'll be very confused as to what's going on with Wonder Woman there. It's our sort of first major introduction to the new Wonder Woman of Future State, Yara Flor, who is a great character. Like, I think she's really fantastic. I'm really kind of need more of her immediately. So I think she's possibly one of the first great character finds of 2021. I think that was immediately obviously when they announced it a couple of months back, because people seemed immediately obsessed with this character. So I'm very excited for the character going forward. I was so excited to read this book going into it. It's obviously written and the art by Joelle Jones, with colours from Jordi Belair. The lettering is again by Clayton Coles, who uses a great choicing for lettering, because it kind of adds this whole mythic element to it, which works obviously really well because the character's dealing with mythic situations and creatures. The thing I would say with the story is it's really great. It's a fantastic action-packed superhero story, which is a great introduction to a new character, but also kind of just generally just fun superhero stories. It's a great step in. So if you're new to comics, you could get this and just be like, that was fun. It was a great little adventure for my $3.99 or however much that works at your local comic book store. So it was really great to read. That one thing I would say with the character is she's meant to be Brazilian. She feels very Cali girl, which was a choice, and like, fair enough. I think I was expecting her to sound different when I started reading it. Now, that's a determined expectation, which obviously is totally my bad. Like, I didn't know what the writer's intention was going in. How could I? Like, all we'd seen was pictures of the character and just what to expect going in. And again, it's not bad that she has that kind of effect to her. She just kind of sounds interesting and good in that way. It's very well written. It just kind of didn't feel very much like it was sort of heading in that sort of Brazilian mythology direction. I think it maybe didn't help that she's primarily dealing with Greek mythology still in the story, which was like, I was kind of hoping we'd see a bit more of a different scene, as it were. But like I say, this is still just the first part of the story, and we're going to get more. And plus there are other books dealing with Yara Flor, so we could be getting like a whole greater range of what's involved in the character's world. So there's still plenty more to come. And the first issue certainly has me very excited, and means I'll definitely be picking up the next one. Highly recommend it. If you just want a fun, action-packed superhero story, Future State Wonder Woman's a great one to choose. Next up, we're starting to go into the things I've read digitally, so I don't necessarily have so much of the physical books in front of me. But next up, instead of going straight to the other one of the big two, I'm going to sort of do the step in the middle and do Image. The big new Image book I read this week was Crossover issue 3. It was a story written by Donny Cates, art by Jeff Shaw, colours by Dee Cunniffe, and letters from John J. Hill. And I'm really into this. Like, it's when it was coming out, like I'm kind of got a story coming up very soon, which I've kind of mentioned, which is very similar. So as soon as I heard about this, I was like straight into Donny's DMs and just be like, hey man, just want to run something by you. But like, his story is actually very different. It deals with some things which sound kind of similar, but they're very different. So I immediately was hooked for crossover to that. But then like when I first read the first issue, the story was just immediately just like, this is so interesting. I really want to see where he's going with this. Because I think the fun thing about crossover is like, there's the very obvious things going on, you know, that it's a world where superheroes and sort of comic book characters and potentially various other media characters have infected or come over to the real world. And that's obviously like a very simple baseline idea of what a story is, but like, I think really it's a lot going to be telling us a story a little bit about what stories mean to us, and about having the love for that kind of stuff. And we're going to see that going forward. Crossover issue 3 ends on a really big final page reveal, which I think will have a lot of people very excited, particularly big fans of certain comics. So like I say, I think it's got at the moment still an element where it's accessible to someone who's not a general comic book reader, but if you are a big comic book reader and you have been for a while, then I think you're going to find a lot more in this book which is just going to blow you away. Like, not least because it features some characters that Donny wrote very early in his career that were probably not as well known as other characters he tends to write, so it's going to be like a little bit of a nice surprise for a lot of people. There's so many little things which I just absolutely love with crossover, like the way the characters from the comic book universe who are in the real world look different because of how they're coloured, not just the colouring choices, but like how they are actually coloured. Dee does an incredible job there with sort of adding that sort of layer of differentiation there, and it just kind of feels like a very down-to-earth story despite these sort of large things going on, and I think it's really nice to have, because that's kind of why I think it's so good. Like, there's heart in there. You're getting a bit of what Donny loves, about comics. And I think, like I say, from the time he's spoken about where it's come from, like, it really makes a lot of sense. And I think it's going to be very exciting to see it going forward. So it's only 3 issues in so far. So if you've not been picking it up, I highly recommend it. I do think it's one of these ones where it'll be better if you pick up in single issues rather than waiting for trade. Just because it's gonna have a lot of, it looks like it's gonna have a lot of big surprising reveals, which are gonna get spoiled for you if you wait for trade. Like, you know how Twitter is, it's gonna get spoiled. So yeah, I would say check it out. Crossover 3 was a lot of fun. I'm very excited to see how that plays out going forward. I think it's going to be really huge. I think a lot of people are going to be talking about it for a long time. So it's a pretty major. Finally, I'm just going to review one last comic for this week. I didn't actually read a ton this week. The world's kind of been on fire, so kind of been a bit crazy to sort of catch up with everything. But one thing I did read this week and blew me away from Marvel was Guardians of the Galaxy issue 10. Guardians of the Galaxy is now written by Al Ewing, featuring art by Yohan Cabal, with Federico Blee on the colours, and Corey Petit doing the lettering. This issue is just fantastic. It's a tie-in issue to a major event which is running in Marvel at the moment called King in Black, which is actually written by Donny Cates. This issue is a really great way of doing a tie-in issue, because although it is connected to that event in that it involves certain monsters and creatures which are prevalent in that main story, you don't have to have read that main event to know what's going on, really. It's just a monster of a week, potentially. The main focus of the story is the Guardians of the Galaxy's own characters, in particular Peter Quill, Star-Lord, and what has become of him. If you haven't been reading the series, a lot has kind of happened. I'm not going to spoil it, but there's kind of like a lot going on, and he's having a major return, and it means that the character is having a bit of a major change. The most interesting thing you'll find with Al Ewing's work recently is that there's not just modern new ideas that he's inserting into the characters and the comics that he's writing, but there's a clear love and reference to old stories and the original origins of the characters that he's handling. And Peter Quill, Star-Lord, has a major element of that right now. For many who don't necessarily know, who maybe came into Guardians of the Galaxy from the movies, originally Star-Lord was a very different concept, a very different character to how he's been presented in recent years, and in particular after the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And he was a little bit more esoteric when he was originally created, a little bit more hippie. And this, now Al is writing him, and he's done it in such a way that the character's kind of got that back. There's a very opening your third eye way of looking at the character, which I think is really interesting. It adds this whole exciting new element to him, which feels original and its own thing, and not just trying to mimic the movie. It's still, however, got that recognizable element of Star-Lord, so that people who don't necessarily know those old comics from the 70s, I want to say, possibly even older, would not really get. So you still get that element of the sort of slightly brash, quipping Star-Lord that we know from the movies, and how the character has been presented in the last decade, sort of still there. So you get, it's a great way of melding those elements of the character so that they marry perfectly, because the two different versions of Star-Lord shouldn't work. Like, they're so very different. It's very hard to think how you would find a way to get those together. They feel like they've been divergent paths for such a long time. And what Al's managed to do is sort of create a very recognizable character who takes both these elements and puts them together, but also sort of, he's kind of recognizable in the sense of he's a little bit going back to the California idea, like Halle dude bro hippie surfer guy, and you kind of like, I'm kind of into it. It's really fun, it's really interesting, it's got this whole esoteric element which I'm really loving. The artwork which Cabal does on it is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, like, I'm just gonna throw up this page here, which is just absolutely stunning. The way the colors are done by Blee really work for the story. There is some elements where there's like a few digital elements which are thrown in, which sort of create for some moments which are really interesting, which I just like, stuck out to me. But the thing which really sticks with me is that there's a slightly watercolory element to the coloring, so it just makes like the skin of the characters look more skin-like and makes everything feel a little bit more natural in these very fantastical superhero settings. But then when the elements of lighting change, it really shows, it really strikes out. Like, there's a reason the character is called Star-Lord, and when it's coloured by Blee in that way, it really shines, literally. So I would highly recommend getting onto Guardians of the Galaxy if you can. I kind of get the inkling due to some of the trade dress they've got on the front covers there that there's something coming. Not necessarily a relaunch, but certainly a major arc possibly coming for the series. So I'm very excited to see where it's coming, or rather where it's going. And yeah, it's just really exciting to see weird pansexual, polyamorous, hippie Star-Lord. I'm very into it. So yeah, this is the book to get if you really want something really exciting and interesting. Plus, it's incredibly queer, by the way. You've got lesbian lovers in the team. You've got bisexual lovers in the team as well now. Like one of whose boys pretty much nothing on his top half, so you know it works. If you like your Barry types, go and get it, because he's got a Barry kind of Hercules with a little grey in his beard. It's kind of hot. Okay, so that's it for what I'm going to review this week. I'm going to try and do a little bit more reading of some non sort of mainstream publishers in the coming weeks. I've got a little bit of a big read pile to go through, so like I'm going to try and work through some of these Kickstarter back comics and review them next, because I think they're going to be, like say, the exciting things to read for the future, like for really getting in on the ground floor with creators in their early sort of careers. Like I say, some great comics out there. I know it's been a tough week. I know it's been, you know, a hard time for a lot of people right now, but obviously sometimes you've got to get your entertainment where you can. So like say, if you can want to try something out, there are always some great new comics you can read. If you've never read comics before, I highly recommend it. Like I say, they can be relatively cheap, particularly if you're reading digitally. And like I say, if you can't have access to a comic book shop at the moment because of your various pandemic restrictions, it's giving you another element of entertainment you can get at home. So like I say, feel free to check out some of these comics which I've reviewed today. Check out all the other comics which are available. Feel free to check out any of my comics as well, which are available digitally on Comixology or in print through my own online store and could be posted anywhere in the world. Links below. Likewise, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and again, links below where you can find that. Again, if you can hit a like and subscribe to the channel, it helps me out a lot. And if you comment, if you've got anything to say, did you enjoy the comics which I reviewed this week? Was there anything that you read this week that you really loved as well? So feel free to leave a comment and tell me about that. Yeah, been great to do another little video for you all. Hope you all liked it. A little bit more rushed, no makeup today. Maybe next time. And yeah, I'll hopefully get to reviewing some comics next week sometime and get some more content out for you. Thanks very much, you all. Love you now.